So let's continue on with hypocrisy and privacy. Now, remember in the previous video, go check it out if you haven't seen it. We split hypocrisy into broad and narrow. And broad hypocrisy is always involving just simply saying there's a gap between the privacy zone and the public appearance, the public person. So there's this gap, this space that says, okay, when you're on this side of the space, you're in the personal, the private, and when you're on that side, yeah, then it's the public me. So the private me and the public me. And the broad ones, some people said, okay, in general, that's bad. We should have complete transparency. And we saw that seems to be problematic to condemn broad hypocrisy because, then you'd have to demand complete transparency in public. And that led to very counterintuitive results. So then we said, okay, well, maybe if you are knowingly doing this and knowingly being deceptive and all that, maybe that's the problem. And so under certain circumstances, this gap could create problems, and we would say, you're being a hypocrite, and we would morally blame you for that. So in other words, we're now looking at narrow hypocrisy. And we say that, okay, when we blame you for being a hypocrite, that's going to depend on circumstances. Now, think about this. This could mean that, in some circumstances, we may not blame you for being a narrow hypocrite. That's what I want to explore here and make the case that, yeah, we can create some situations where we'd say, hey, it's perfectly justified to be a narrow hypocrite. That just makes the problem of hypocrisy, whether or not it's always bad, even more problematic. Because remember, we said we contrasted hypocrisy and privacy simply that even though they both involve concealment, we tend to say we have a right to privacy. We don't tend to say we have a right to hypocrisy. But I want to show you under some circumstances, we might say that even the notion of rights doesn't split these two concepts all that well, because I want to show you that it's possible to generate a case where somebody even might say, I had the right to be a hypocrite. Okay, let's have but that's getting a little ahead of the story. So let's think of it this way. Let's have a general thesis that if a person knowingly projects an image, right, to gain something, so telling a falsehood about themselves, right? Putting out something into the public space, the public me, which doesn't reflect the inner me, and I'm putting that out to gain something. We say, hey, that's being a hypocrite, right? You're concealing the real you. You're putting out a public you in order to gain something by that. We would say you're being a hypocrite, right? You're gaining something by it. You know what you're doing. You're deliberately doing it. The context is clear and all that, and yet you're doing it anyways. That is narrow hypocrisy, and that's bad. Don't do that, right? That's wrong. So let's call this the general sort of moral thesis. I got a little asterisk here regarding the morality of narrow hypocrisy. That is bad, right? You're knowing what you're doing. You're distorting things. You're putting out a distortion of you because you think you'll get something out of the deal. It'll make your life better, or you'll gain something. Think about that. Lots of times we put out false images of ourselves, not just to gain something, but to avoid things, right? So lots of times people will say, like how many times have you ever been, and you think about this, and I think we've all encountered this, where you've been in a room and a bunch of people have been talking in a certain way, you don't agree. And then they say, is anyone against this? And you don't want to stand up and say, nah, I don't like this idea, because there could be very negative consequences. People do that, unfortunately, or fortunately, or whatever, but people do it, right? So I want to turn to a classic paper by Eva Kitay, 1982, on hypocrisy. Great classic work. And she says, let's think about this, right? And she, uses this term, victim hypocrites, right? And she tells this story, she creates this story, but, there's documentary evidence that, suppose that you have a Jewish person in the Nazi state and they don't know, right? So this Jewish person is around other people that are believers in all this stuff. And this person's like, I don't want them to know who I really am. And so maybe doesn't really participate in anything, like actions that are horrible, but doesn't tend to identify themselves, doesn't tend to say, yeah, this is who I really am. Maybe that person goes along with some of the slogans and some of these, rather loathsome things that people would say. And goes, yeah, okay. Maybe even indulges a little bit and says them him or herself, but doesn't actually participate in any of the actions, but maybe just does enough to disguise so that the people will think that this person is not Jewish, right? And so this person is basically, this Jewish person in this situation is acting in a way to knowingly project to gain something, namely security, right? I'm not going to get taken away, or they're trying to avoid something horrible. Wouldn't we say that's would we blame that person? Right? I mean, I know it's always easy for us to go, I wouldn't do that if I were back then. But think about it. Really, do we really want, we can say that, yes, it's hypocrisy. It's narrow hypocrisy. The person knows exactly what they're doing. As a matter of fact, that's why they're doing it, because they're in full cognizance of their situation, which involves this kind of structure around them and what that structure thinks about who they really are, and what that structure will eventually do if the people that are working in that structure find out who this person really is. So I think we've got something that this person would definitely be a victim, but is being hypocritical. Yeah, I think we can say that. But again, would you really blame a person for doing that? And we're not saying that this person, let's say, participated and committed all these crimes and all. No. We're not going that far. We're just talking about someone who might just sort of try to pass for somebody who believes this stuff but really doesn't. Now, Kate goes into even much more detail on this, which is quite fascinating. It makes an even stronger case. But just to think about this, what people might do. And so have we got a counterexample to this, right? We got this all filled, but we might say, yeah, it's narrow, but we might say, nah, it's not bad. We can understand that. Or we might say, well, yeah, technically speaking, it might be wrong, but we would certainly excuse it. So we wouldn't say, we might say it's not blameworthy, right? We might say, yeah, technically speaking, it fulfills the description, but we wouldn't really come down on someone for doing that. So you might say, okay, yeah, my general thesis that if a person blah, 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 they have this, it's narrow and it's bad. I'm going to still maintain that general thesis. I'm going to accept that this is a counterexample to my general thesis, but I'm going to say something like this. Well, look, we're not doing logic. We're not doing mathematics here. We're not even doing physics or engineering. We are talking about general concepts that have a lot of play in them. There's a lot of plasticity in them. So when you want to make general proclamations about these kinds of concepts like hypocrisy and privacy, there's going to be some play. You don't get an absolute rigid, no exceptions kind of generalization. But what would I say about this counterexample? I'd say, yes, it's a counterexample, but it seems to be a counterexample, but it's an extreme case. Like, look, you're talking about this particular thing. Are all possible counterexamples to my general thesis regarding the morality, bad, of narrow hypocrisy, are all the counterexamples that you could, cook up or find, are they all extreme cases? Like, man, you got to bring in the Nazis. You got to bring in something really extreme. And I could just simply say, okay, well, look, in everyday life, not in these extreme cases, but in everyday life, things that are possible for all of us to encounter, we want to maintain this general thesis holds, and we will tuck these, counterexamples into while under wild extreme situations, yeah, the thesis doesn't hold. But in general, it still does, and I'm going to say that generally, I'm going to condemn, it's blameworthy if somebody engages in narrow hypocrisy. Okay, that seems to be okay. But think about this. You could have, as Zabados talks about in the book, what about something like a hypocritical fundraiser? Here is the attempt to construct an example that's not really that far-fetched. You could modify these to see how it fits in your own life. And if you've been in similar situations, the hypocritical fundraiser, let's call the fundraiser X. And X is raising money for a great cause. Okay, so these are just part of the thought experiment. Doesn't matter what the cause is. It's a great cause, and I'm going to just presuppose that we all agree it's a great cause. And X is decent person, and X is raising money for a great cause called the cause Z. X then encounters rich guy. So this rich guy, RG, and RG says, I'm thinking of giving you big bucks for cause Z. That sounds good to me, but you know, because you're a good fundraiser, you've done your homework. You know a little bit about this rich guy. And you know that maybe he got his money in legitimate ways, so there's no problem there. But you know that rich guy has some pretty horrible views. And just for the sake of discussion, I want to stress that the money that he's got were legitimate. You don't have any moral problems with the way he got the money, where he made his billions and zillions or whatever. So that's part of the thought experiment too. So you're okay with how the money came. So it's not dirty money, but the guy himself is like, ugh, you're not too impressed. And you know that he's got these horrible views. Again, these HVs, we're just going to accept that they're horrible views. And you know that you kind of got to play with this guy. You got to play ball, right? So X then, X talks and appears to agree with the horrible views, not acting on them, not encouraging or whatever, or indulging or nothing, but just kind of, over the conversation, over coffee, these horrible things come up, and X kind of doesn't really disagree, maybe doesn't agree with all that much, but certainly leaves RG with the idea that X is sympathetic to these HVs, and that increases the probability that RG will give these big dollars for the cause Z. Couldn't we say that X is indeed being hypocritical, knowingly projecting an image to gain something? Maybe X also, by bringing in this big donor, might achieve a little more status in the organization that is working for Z. So you think about it. I kind of buttered up old RG, and in the end, he gave us a zillion amount of dollars. It made my bosses happy. I got a little promotion out of the deal, and man, we had a lot of money to put towards Z, so that helped a lot of people out. This is great. And then someone says, yeah, wait a second, little X that you are, you were hypocritical in the narrow sense. You knew exactly what you're doing. You put forth an image of yourself that was a false image, and you gained from it, but you also gained for a variety of things, not just yourself. Wouldn't we say that is a general, that's a more everyday kind of example that people will do, and it is narrow hypocrisy. So hypocritical, narrow sense, seems to be yes. Should we blame or condemn or blame X? We probably wouldn't. We'd probably say, well, it sure helped out the great cause Z. That helped a lot of, dogs and children and puppies and all kinds of good things that we want to help, that were suffering and stuff like that. Whatever you want for the great cause, spell that out however you like. And then what if X were to say to you something even stronger? Not only was it morally permissible, but I kind of had the right to do that, right? I had the right to put this great cause and all this stuff ahead. Maybe not so much myself, but certainly for the great cause. I kind of had a right to be a hypocrite there. And if I would have just said, oh no, because you could say to X, if X were to say something like this, oh no, I won't. And I'm going to stack the deck a little bit, but. If X said, oh, no, I would never be a narrow hypocrite. I don't care if RG gives billions for Z. I would never do that. I would simply be honest and say, look, RG, give me the money, and I think you're a horrible person. And then RG says, well, I'm not giving you the money if you're going to talk to me like that. Well, so be it. Wouldn't we say, man, really? Just because you just didn't want to tarnish your image and it's only in this guy's eyes, maybe no one else would ever know. You said, no, I won't do it. Maybe we might even say in that case, X was behaving improperly. So then X, okay, back to the original thought experiment, X could say, I had the right to do that, right? Not only was it morally permissible, I certainly had a right to kind of tarnish a little bit about myself in order to get that money. You really can't condemn me for that, right? Anyway, so maybe it's not that strong, but a weaker thing, X might say something like, I really shouldn't be condemned for being a narrow hypocrite. So there you go. So both in the broad sense, it seems to be problematic to condemn hypocrisy. And even we can construct not just extreme examples, extreme counterexamples to this. We could construct ones that you might actually find in everyday life. So what you want to do is think, have you ever been in a situation that's analogous to this? Right? This doesn't seem too extreme. This one does. But this one certainly, you might think, oh, geez, we've all been kind of in situations similar to that where we've been a bit of a hypocrite to get some greater good, kind of running along a sort of utilitarian kind of line. In that sense, it might be defensible, or you might even say you have the right to do it. All right, so now we've got even making it, more problematic as to this relationship between hypocrisy and privacy, because it doesn't seem that hypocrisy is always bad. So maybe it's more like privacy, and that privacy is not always bad. Well, is privacy always good? Is it always bad? We're going to have to look a little bit more at that, but that's a story for the next video. See you there.